Stuart and Shannon's marriage had it all: love, trust, and a 10-year history that was hard to break. But one trip to the Bahamas changed everything. Secret glances, warning signs, chance encounters. Stu didn't know yet that this trip would be the beginning of the end for him. Why do all these stories about cheating wives seem so cliched? It's always the same old plot. I returned home early, discovered an email, caught her and her lover at the office Christmas party, or happened to drive by a motel and saw her car parked outside a room. Surely there must be other ways a cuckolded husband can uncover his wife's infidelity, or so you'd think. Then again, maybe there aren't. Perhaps there are only a handful of ways a man realizes his marriage has come to a complete and utter halt. In my case, I was so deeply in love with my wife of 10 years that it took a total lightning strike for me to understand what had been happening between her and her lover over the past 6 months. I had absolutely no clue. Shannon and I met in our sophomore year of college, and we were immediately attracted to each other. She had gorgeous red hair, expressive blue eyes, a beautiful smile, and a slender figure with long legs. But besides her looks, it was her personality that made me fall deeply in love. She was an intelligent, cheerful, and interesting conversationalist. We could talk for hours on any topic. After 3 months of friendship and relationship, Shannon decided to share an important moment in our lives with me. This moment was special for both of us, and will always remain in my memory. Since then, we had no doubt that we would be together forever, and so it went on for the next 10 years. My name is Stuart Gray, but everyone calls me Stu. I grew up in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. I stand 6 feet tall and weigh 187 pounds. People generally find me attractive, with brown eyes and sandy hair. Professionally, I work as a contractor and run a small company with a dedicated team of 5 employees. We specialize in interior renovations for clients who can afford high-quality upgrades, and our work is highly regarded. Shannon, my partner, teaches music at a local high school. Together, we earn a comfortable living, own a beautiful home, and, being both in our early 30s, we're planning to start a family soon. As I mentioned earlier, we've enjoyed a wonderful first 10 years of marriage. Our relationship was strong, and our connection was loving and often passionate. While we weren't together constantly, we shared intimate moments regularly, and it was always meaningful. We would cuddle every night, and each morning, I would wake up beside Shannon, feeling amazed by her beauty and how fortunate I was to have her as my wife. I can honestly say that, even though I cherished every day spent with her, I would have willingly given up anything for her without hesitation. I suppose I should have phrased my last statement in the past tense, because something completely unexpected caught me off guard. Something so utterly unforeseen and emotionally overwhelming that I still haven't fully recovered from it. As a contractor in the Midwest, most of our work is limited to the spring, summer, and fall seasons. People generally dislike having their home interiors disrupted when it's 5 degrees outside with 3 feet of snow on the ground. Because of this, Shannon and I usually took our vacations around the Christmas and New Year holidays and during spring break. In the summer, while I was busy earning money, Shannon would occasionally spend a week visiting her parents, go shopping with her 2 sisters, or take a summer course or 2 to keep her teaching credentials up to date. Each winter, our favorite getaway was to a warm destination. During the particularly tumultuous winter of our relationship's decline, we chose an all-inclusive resort in the Bahamas, 2 weeks in paradise intended for us to reconnect both physically and spiritually. However, I soon realized how mistaken that belief was. Firstly, I need to explain that before Shannon and I boarded that plane in Minneapolis, I had absolutely no idea that I would accuse you of lying and even spit in your face if you suggested there was something wrong in our marriage. We appeared to be the perfect couple, deeply in love and profoundly connected in every way, almost as if we were a single person split into 2 bodies. Our union was so strong that nothing in heaven or on earth could ever come between us. I suppose I simply forgot that there was also a hell, and although I didn't realize it at the time, I was teetering on the edge, about to fall into a molten abyss. The initial sign that something was off occurred during the security screening at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The queue was lengthy, filled with travelers eager to swap the biting cold for some tropical heat. As Shannon and I stood in line waiting to pass through the scanners, I noticed a man in the adjacent line casting glances toward Shannon. While this wasn't out of the ordinary, my wife is an attractive woman who often attracts wandering eyes. It felt different this time, almost as if he was deliberately trying to catch her attention. Curious, I feigned checking my boarding pass while discreetly observing the man. His looks in her direction were, to put it mildly, sneaky. Then I noticed Shannon quickly looking back at him and making a slight gesture with her hand, as if to say, "Not now." He responded with a smile and a nod, nearly causing me to spill my breakfast. I was taken aback. It dawned on me that they were acquainted. I wasn't sure how well, but this realization triggered a flood of warning signals. As we proceeded through security, I kept a close watch on both of them, but neither made any further attempts to communicate. I became noticeably quiet, though Shannon didn't seem to pick up on it. Perhaps her mind was elsewhere. I hoped that the man wasn't on our flight, but once we boarded and took our seats, I saw I was wrong. He was seated in an aisle seat about 15 rows ahead of us. Another oddity was that Shannon opted for the aisle seat in our row, which is unusual for her since she typically prefers the window. This time, however, she chose differently. I inquired about the change since I had reserved the window seat for her and taken the middle seat myself, but she simply mentioned that her stomach was upset from breakfast and she didn't want to bother anyone if she needed to use the restroom. I approached the woman in the aisle seat and asked if she would mind switching to the window seat, explaining that my wife was experiencing stomach issues. She agreed without hesitation, and we successfully swapped seats. Normally, I have no trouble sleeping on a plane, and the long flight from Minneapolis to Miami would have allowed me to rest. However, due to my heightened anxiety, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep on this flight, though I planned to act as if I could. We stored our carry-on bags in the overhead compartment, and Shannon placed her handbag under the seat in front of her. Once the plane took off, I took out my twins' baseball cap, pulled it down over my eyes, and acted like I was sleeping. I gave myself enough room to keep an eye on Shannon, and about 15 minutes later, she glanced in my direction. Convinced I was asleep, she stood up and walked down the aisle toward the restrooms. I adjusted my seat to get a full view of the aisle, and noticed that as she passed the seat of someone I now believed was her acquaintance, she reached out to steady herself and briefly touched his shoulder. This was further evidence that something was happening between them, and that the entire situation wasn't just a coincidence. I noticed that they hadn't made eye contact initially, prompting Shannon to head to the restroom. A short while later, when she returned, she glanced directly at him. He stood up and approached her. As they met in the aisle, instead of stepping aside to let one pass, they paused for a moment. He placed his hand lightly on her waist, and she briefly touched his chest before speaking to him. They both exchanged warm smiles, and as she walked back to her seat, his hand gently brushed her back, causing Shannon to smile again. That was all it took for me to realize that these two had known each other for some time and were clearly close on some level. At the same moment, it struck me with the force of a ton of bricks that my wonderful marriage was genuinely at risk and could very well be coming to an end. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with so much anxiety that I had to look away from Shannon as she sat down and fastened her seatbelt. How could she do this to me, to our relationship? How long had this been happening? Who was this man? and how deep had their relationship already become? For the remainder of the flight, I tried to make sense of everything I had witnessed and hoped that when we connected to our flight to Nassau, he wouldn't be on board, though deep down I knew he would be. To my distress, I was correct. As soon as Shannon and I boarded the plane, I saw him sitting 5 rows behind us. He was absorbed in the in-flight magazine and ignored us as we took our seats. Shannon, now apparently free from her stomach issues, chose her usual window seat. The flight to Nassau was uneventful, and after landing we retrieved our luggage, rented a car, and headed to the resort. While I was driving, Shannon was texting, prompting me to ask, "Who are you messaging?" "Oh, just my mom and sisters, letting them know we've arrived." Yeah, maybe, I thought, but I'd really like to see for myself. Isn't it strange how suspicions can quickly escalate? Our room was stunning, featuring a balcony with views of the ocean and one of the pools. As we began unpacking, I felt the need to make a meaningful gesture to win back my wife. I approached Shannon, embraced her, and gently kissed her neck. "Do you know how much I love you?" Shannon turned to face me and gave me a soft kiss on the lips. "I love you too, baby," she replied. There was an unusual look in her eyes, as if she wasn't truly present in the room with me. It sent chills down my spine. I kissed her once more and said, "You know I would never do anything to hurt you, right, Shannon?" She recoiled slightly. "I know that, Stu. And I understand you would never do anything to harm me or our wonderful marriage," I continued. She flinched again, and I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. "Of course, Stu. You know I wouldn't," she responded, unable to meet my gaze and staring at the floor instead. It became clear to me that I had probably lost the battle. Whether she hadn't yet or was already, I realized she might soon be with another man. I released her and hurried to the bathroom, trying to keep myself together before reaching it. I spent several minutes in the bathroom trying to regain my composure, repeatedly asking myself the same questions. How did this happen? What did I do to push her into another man's arms? Why hadn't I noticed anything weeks or months earlier? Most importantly, what can I do to prevent her from completely destroying us, or is it already too late? After washing my face, I left the bathroom. Shannon was there with a strange expression on her face. "Oh my God, Stu, my period just started and I didn't bring any tampons." "What?" I replied. "My period, Stu, it just began." "But you only got over it a week ago. How could it have started again?" "I'm not sure, but it happens sometimes. Maybe the excitement of the vacation triggered it. I need to go to the gift shop and buy some tampons," she said, leaving and closing the door behind her. My first thought was that maybe this was a good sign. It could slow down the romance between her and her boyfriend, whoever he might be. Then I realized it didn't make sense. This had never happened to her before in all our years together. She was on birth control, and her periods were always reliably regular. So why would she lie about it? Unless she thought that having her period would stop me from pressuring her for intimacy, allowing her to focus all her love and passion on her new man. That had to be it. If so, she wasn't the woman I married. No one could be so deceitful and cruel. She must really hate me to let me plan and pay for this trip, just so she could shut me out of her life and give everything she has to a man I've never even met. I felt completely disoriented, as if I were losing my sanity. Who was this woman I had cherished wholeheartedly for more than 10 years? Glancing around the room, I noticed she had left her cell phone beside the TV. I powered it on, unsure if she had changed the passcode, but she hadn't, another oversight on her part. I accessed her messages and saw the latest ones were from someone named Anthony Eisner. I scrolled back to the beginning of their conversation, which started while we were driving to the resort. Anthony: "Hey baby, you looked amazing. I can't wait to see you again." Shannon: You almost got us caught by Stu at the airport. Anthony, I just couldn't resist. When I'm near you, I lose control. Almost kissed you on the plane. Shannon, that would have been risky, but I did enjoy our little moment in the aisle. LOL. Gotta go, we're almost there. Their conversation continued once we arrived at the resort. Anthony, I'm in the lobby. You ready? Shannon, I'm in my room. Stu's in the bathroom. He's acting strange. Anthony, doesn't matter. When are you leaving him for good? Shannon, I've told you before, I'm not leaving him. Stu's a great husband. He loves me and takes care of me. Anthony, but we have something special, don't we? Shannon, we do, but my life with Stu is something I can't walk away from. These next 2 weeks are for us, but after that, my life with Stu continues. Anthony, I get it. We'll make the most of our time together. Shannon, exactly. Let's just enjoy these 2 weeks while we can. I stood there completely stunned, began to switch out her phone, and then halted. There was a chance I might use those messages as evidence in the divorce. I attempted to replace her phone with mine, but then thought, screw her. My phone contains all my personal data, and she's created this chaos. I decided to let her try to resolve it herself, so I kept both of our phones. I assumed it wouldn't take her long to realize her phone was missing, but by then, I would have already left. I could feel bile rising in my throat, making me gag. I walked over to the window and looked out at the stunning Caribbean scenery. Just 8 hours earlier, I was the happiest man alive, preparing for 2 weeks of romance under the tropical sun with the love of my life, my wife, my soulmate. But now my entire world has fallen apart. Never in my life had I felt so alone, shocked, and furious. I wanted to confront both of them, to make them understand how deeply they had hurt me. Thankfully, the rational part of my mind gradually regained control. Divorce seemed inevitable. There was no way I could stay with someone who had betrayed me. But beyond the divorce, I wanted justice. As I stared out the window, I happened to glance down at the pool and saw them together, embracing and sharing a kiss. Anthony's hands drifted down as they stood close, and Shannon leaned into him. The sight made me feel sick to my stomach. Instead of reacting impulsively, I took a deep breath and grabbed my video recorder, which I had brought along for the trip. Now I was using it to capture their actions. It seemed Shannon hadn't realized the pool was visible from our room, or she would have been more discreet. The camera had a good zoom, allowing me to capture their interactions clearly. Watching it hurt, but I knew I might need this footage later. I urgently needed a plan, but my mind was racing. How could they be so bold? As I reflected, it became clearer. Shannon must have had a plan for keeping me occupied while she spent time with Anthony. I kept recording as they shared another kiss. Then Shannon quickly turned and walked away. She would return to our room any moment, and I had to keep my emotions in check. I turned on the shower, telling myself to stay calm. If she asked, I would simply say that a shower helps me unwind after the flight, and I wanted to wash off the stress of traveling. 5 minutes later, I heard the door to our room open and shut. "I'm back," she announced. I brought us some water and my tampons. "Great. I'll be out of the shower shortly." Why did she bring water? The resort already supplies bottled water in every room. Then it dawned on me. She intended to prohibited substances me. My mind started racing on how to handle the situation. If I refused to drink the water she provided, she would realize I was suspicious. But if I did drink it, and it was laced, I'd be incapacitated while she and her lover returned to his room. What could I do? I turned off the shower and slowly dried myself, trying to think of a way out. Then Shannon knocked on the door. "Are you okay? You've been in there for a while now." Her voice was filled with concern. I couldn't tell if she was genuinely worried about me or if she was anxious about being late for her important date. My frustration started to build again, but I struggled to maintain my composure as I opened the door and saw her by the bed, drinking from a water bottle. She handed me the other bottle, and I realized it had already been opened. "We need to stay hydrated with this climate change," she said, meeting my gaze before quickly turning away. I took the bottle, pretended to take a large sip, and then walked back into the bathroom. Quickly and quietly, I spit the water into the sink and emptied the bottle. I grabbed another water bottle from the bathroom counter and refilled the now empty one Shannon had given me. When I returned to the room, she was busy unpacking, organizing items into drawers, and hanging clothes in the closet, so I was fairly certain she hadn't noticed me spitting out the water or refilling the bottle. As I exited the bathroom sipping my water, I noticed that she had laid out a striking red dress. "Is that what you plan to wear to dinner? It feels like a waste if we can't spend time together." "You know that dress always catches my eye," I said, realizing in that moment she wasn't dressing for me. "Well, I brought it, so I might as well wear it," she replied with a smile. "Aren't you tired from all that traveling? You must be exhausted." That's when it hit me. She had likely done something to my drink. But I needed more proof, so I decided to play along. I took another sip and pretended to feel drowsy, letting my eyes droop slightly, even though inside I was wide awake, my heart racing. "Now that you mention it, I am feeling a bit tired. What time do we need to get ready for dinner?" I asked, keeping up the act. "They won't start serving for a few hours. Why don't you lie down and rest for a while? I'll wake you when it's time to get ready," she suggested so convincingly that it was hard not to believe her. I yawned and replied, "All right, some rest sounds good. Just make sure I don't sleep too long. I want to spend as much time with you as I can. I love you so much." I saw her tense up for a moment, as if my words had struck a nerve. "I love you too," she said, but the warmth in her voice was gone. I lay down on the bed and pretended to drift off. Soon I heard her on the phone. "Hey, it worked. He's out. How long will this keep him asleep?" "That means we have the whole night." "I can't wait to see you," she said with a soft laugh, and I almost lost my composure but stayed still. "I'll meet you at the Sandpiper Bar in an hour. I want to get ready," she added with another laugh. "You're terrible. I can't wait either. Bye." She hung up and started preparing for her night. I observed her with my eyes barely open as she selected her underwear. What a girl of easy virtue. My frustration continued to rise as I struggled to appear unconscious. She proceeded to get ready, then entered the bathroom to start a shower. I knew she would be in there for at least 10 minutes. So as soon as I heard the shower door close, I quickly got up and went straight to her purse. I began searching through it for sleeping pills or anything she might have added to the water bottle she gave me. I found a pill bottle without any label indicating its contents. Upon opening it, I discovered about a dozen small whitish capsules. This must be what she put in my water, so I carefully poured out approximately 5 of the pills and placed the bottle back in her purse. Then I grabbed a tissue, wrapped the pills, and tucked them into the pocket of the shorts I was wearing. I swiftly returned to the bed just as I heard her turn off the shower. I settled back in my previous position and continued my act of sleeping as she finished getting ready for her date. It took her another 45 minutes to get ready, but the moment she stepped out the door, I sprang into action, dressing as quickly as possible. While I had been lying there, I managed to devise a plan. First, I needed to gather more video evidence of the two of them together. Second, I aimed to sabotage their plans for the remainder of this trip. I wasn't exactly sure how I would accomplish that, but I was certain that by the end, both of them would be in serious trouble. Third, I planned to return home several days ahead of schedule before our trip was supposed to conclude and initiate divorce proceedings. I wanted to get ahead of Shannon before she could take any steps to hinder or delay me, such as draining our bank accounts and canceling all our credit cards. No, I intended to handle that myself, not her. Once I was dressed, I grabbed the video camera I'd used earlier that day and headed out the door. It was advertised as performing well in low light, or so I thought. I was about to find out as I made my way to the bar. The resort wasn't very large and featured only 2 bars, both overlooking the ocean. The Sandpiper was the bigger of the 2 and included a dance floor. I managed to secure a strategic spot behind some low palm trees, providing me with a clear view into the bar while keeping me hidden from sight. The camera's zoom lens captured some excellent footage. The bar wasn't too crowded, making it easy to locate my target. She was wearing that infuriating red dress that I used to love, but now it ignited my anger and resentment. He was touching her all over, and it took immense self-control and determination not to rush over and physically assault that jerk. No, I had to remind myself that I was there to collect evidence, not to end up in jail. I began recording them as they behaved like a couple on a Caribbean getaway. They laughed, touched, and kissed just as Shannon and I used to. After about an hour, a DJ started playing some music, and they took to the dance floor. Watching them dance together for over another hour became unbearable, and I was ready to return to our room, my room, alone. Then I noticed them leaving the dance floor rather quickly. Carefully, I followed them, maintaining a distance to ensure I wasn't seen. As I followed them, they occasionally paused to kiss and hold each other while I recorded their actions. Soon they reached his room at the back of the resort. It was smaller than ours, situated on the ground floor, with no view of the ocean. I thought to myself, this guy must be on a tight budget. They entered his room, and I moved closer to try to see inside. Luckily, the curtains weren't fully closed, and the window was slightly open, allowing me to hear their conversation and capture everything they said. They started talking quietly, then began embracing and undressing each other as I continued recording. Watching this betrayal unfold was painful, but I knew I needed the proof. As they continued, I couldn't help but reflect on how unfair it was that she was willing to betray me this way. No matter who he was or what he offered, it didn't excuse her actions. I waited outside, continuing to record. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but then I overheard their conversation again. "Are you sure those pills are safe?" "I don't want anything bad happening to him," she asked, sounding concerned. "Don't worry," he replied. "He'll be out for at least 6 hours. He might wake up with a slight headache, but nothing more. You only gave him one, right?" "Yes, just one." "Why? What would 2 have done?" she asked. The jerk laughed. No, don't worry. If you gave him 2, he'd be out for around 12 hours or more. Just keep giving him one before bedtime, and we'll be able to spend every night together. I want you to be pregnant by the time we leave. Here's the extra key card to my room. If you can get away from him during the day, give me a call and we'll meet back here. Then they both laughed, filling me with so much rage that I felt like vomiting. I had heard and seen enough for one night, so I quietly left and made my way back to my room. Now I had to plan how to destroy them both and make them feel the pain they had caused me. It was clear she was going to try to spend every night with him, so the first thing I was going to do was change those plans. After returning to my room, I reviewed the recordings I had made. Although it was difficult to watch, I started devising a strategy aimed at disrupting their plans. My first objective was to find a way to separate them so I could observe Lover Boy and figure out what his intentions were. I considered how to keep him isolated and unable to continue his affair with Shannon, but I knew I had to stay within reason. The challenge was figuring out how to ensure the 2 of them stayed apart. Then an idea struck me. I would treat Shannon to a day at the spa. The resort offered various spa services, including massages, facials, and more. It would be simple to purchase a package and present it as a thoughtful gift. If she hesitated, I could remind her that the purchase was non-refundable and encourage her to accept it, just as she had manipulated me before. This would keep her busy for a few hours, plenty of time for me to monitor Loverboy and figure out my next steps. I changed into my shorts and went to bed, but as I lay there, all I could think about was the two of them together and the plan I had in mind. Around 5 a.m., Shannon finally came back to the room. She quietly changed and then crawled into bed, cuddling up next to me. Once again, I felt the urge to push her away, but I stayed still, pretending to be asleep, and waited for the right moment to act. A little after 7 a.m., I started to wake up, slowly pretending to be conscious. With Shannon still sound asleep, I got out of bed, took a quick shower, and went out to locate the spa. I hoped it would be open early so I could purchase a package that would keep her engaged long enough for me to attend to some matters. I also wanted to see if I could book a flight back home for either late the next morning or early in the afternoon. Finding the spa was quick, and upon seeing it was open, I went inside to explore their package options. A friendly young woman behind the counter assisted me in selecting a package. I was more interested in the duration of the treatments rather than their specific services. After choosing a package that lasted nearly 3 hours, I asked what the earliest available appointment was. She checked her computer and informed me that 2 p.m. was the first opening she had. After a moment of consideration, I decided to purchase the package as a surprise for my wife. After completing that, I went outside to survey the property, assuming Shannon needed her rest since spending time with her beau the night before had likely exhausted her. Around 9 a.m., I returned to the room and saw she was still deeply asleep. Curious, I rummaged through her purse and found her phone. I looked at her text messages and came across one he had sent within the last hour. Anthony, you were amazing last night. Any chance you can escape from Stu for some afternoon fun? My frustration was resurfacing, but I managed to keep it under control. I had become quite adept at that, and now I realized the end was near. Shannon began to wake up, so I returned her phone and approached her, softly kissing her forehead. Good morning, sleepyhead. I'm sorry about yesterday, falling asleep like that and ruining our dinner plans. But I have a surprise for you. She smiled and yawned. What kind of surprise? I reserved a spa day for you as an apology for last night and to show you how much I love you. Even in her groggy state, I noticed a slight flinch and the uncertainty in her eyes. At that moment, I realized she might be questioning her feelings for me. I met her gaze and asked, "Is everything okay? Don't you like my gift?" "Oh no, I love it. I just wish you had asked me first," she responded with a weak smile. If I had, it wouldn't have been much of a surprise. It's not like you need to rush to the spa right away. I scheduled it for 2 p.m. this afternoon so we can spend some time together beforehand. Is that all right? She nodded and said, "You're very thoughtful, thank you." She kissed my cheek, but something felt off, a reminder of her recent betrayal. "Why don't you freshen up and we'll go have some breakfast," I suggested, getting off the bed as she sat up. "Okay." She got out of bed, grabbed her purse, and headed to the bathroom. I suspected what she might be planning but didn't want to tip her off. I glanced out the window and saw an interesting scene. Anthony was by the pool, chatting with a couple of young women while occasionally glancing at his phone. I watched him type something before putting his phone away. She must have told him about my surprise gift, but he didn't seem particularly upset. Soon his attention shifted back to the two women, and they were laughing together at something one of them said. He then gestured, and the three of them walked out of my view. It seemed Anthony might be making alternative plans if Shannon couldn't join him for the afternoon. That could work in my favor. About an hour later, Shannon and I found ourselves at the breakfast buffet preparing our meals. I was loading up my plate, while she opted for some fruit and a coffee. "Not hungry, darling?" "Is it your period?" I asked. Yes, that must be it. I really don't feel like eating," she responded, clearly distracted. I couldn't help but wonder what Anthony had said in his text, as it seemed to be troubling her. However, it didn't really matter since my plan appeared to be working on them, or at least on her. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk along the beach to explore the ocean. I had my camera with me, capturing footage of the shoreline, the palm trees, and Shannon. She would offer a polite smile while I would remark on her beauty and how wonderful a mother she would become. Then, a flicker of hesitation, uncertainty, and guilt would appear on her face. "Is something wrong, babe? Are you okay?" I could tell her guilt was starting to weigh on her. "No, I'm fine. Just a little tired. Would you mind if I went back to the room for a nap before my spa appointment?" "Sure, no problem. I know it must be tough being on vacation while dealing with your period. Go rest, and I'll see you back in the room after your spa treatment. I'm sure it will do you a world of good." She turned and began walking back toward the resort without even a goodbye kiss. Well, I might be ending things with her soon. Now I just needed to find Anthony and hold him accountable. As I continued walking along the beach, lost in my thoughts, I noticed two couples approaching me. The women were the same ones I recognized from this morning who had been talking with Anthony. Now they were accompanied by two very large men who looked like they could be defensive linemen for the Vikings. As we got closer, I started to hear their conversation. "Come on, babe, don't be like that. You knew Dave and I wanted to go deep sea fishing, and they had 2 spots available. We'll be back before dinner." "Sure, just like you guys to go off and do what you want while we're stuck at the hotel." "Babe, there are plenty of things you could do here. Go into town and shop, relax by the pool or on the beach. Heck, you could even use the workout room they have here." "Are you saying I'm fat?" "You should talk." "No, babe, that wasn't what I meant. I just meant you have a lot of options here, that's all." I realized it was a losing battle for him as they passed by me heading back to the resort, but he kept trying to convince her without success. After wandering the beach for a while, I decided to head back and see what Anthony was up to. I feared that Shannon might have skipped her spa appointment to be with him, but if that was the case, perhaps I could get more video of them together. I roamed the resort for over an hour before ending up outside Anthony's room. Voices drifted from within, but Shannon's voice was absent. Carefully, I readied my camera and approached the window. It was a risky move since it was daytime, and more people might walk by and notice me. I decided the safest option was to place the camera on the external window ledge, pointing into the room, and let it record independently. After setting up the camera, I walked along the path to find a vantage point where I could monitor his door and observe who exited. Time seemed to move sluggishly, but my patience paid off. The 2 women I had seen with Anthony earlier by the pool and later on the beach with 2 men emerged from his room. They were all smiles and laughing, as if sharing a private joke. Once they were out of sight, I quickly retrieved the camera and returned to my room. Since Shannon wouldn't return from her spa treatment for nearly an hour, I had enough time to review the footage I had captured. As soon as I was back in the room, I pulled out my laptop and downloaded all the videos I had recorded since we arrived. Much of it was of Shannon and Anthony. But then I watched what I had just recorded when those 2 girls were in his room. It seemed they had found a way to pass the time while their boyfriends went deep-sea fishing. Anthony had convinced them to spend time with him, and the scene unfolded like something out of a cheap movie. He alternated between the 2 while they took turns, clearly enjoying themselves. As I watched, a new idea hit me. If I could time things just right, I could be back home while Shannon would still be here, confused and wondering what had happened. I suspected she would try to prohibited substances me again tonight, so I planned to pretend it worked, just as I had done before. If all went well, she'd meet Anthony at the bar, where they'd drink and dance before heading back to his room. My plan was to slip something into their drinks toward the end of the night so they'd be passed out before they even made it back to his room. Timing would be crucial, but I knew that in life, things don't always go according to plan. The second part of my plan involved creating a DVR copy of Anthony's recent activities. I have to admit I was somewhat envious of how he managed to persuade 2 women to spend time with him. Using my DVR discs, I duplicated 2 recordings of his afternoon exploits. Now, I just needed to figure out where to leave them. Additionally, I backed up all my previous recordings onto another DVR for added security. I went down to the front desk and successfully mailed that disc to my brother Frank back home, including a note asking him not to watch it or tell anyone that I had sent it. This was just a precaution in case my plan didn't go as expected, or if Shannon and Anthony discovered what I was up to and tried to retaliate. If anything happened to me, at least the disc I sent to my brother would serve as evidence. After checking the time, I realized Shannon would soon be finishing up at the spa, so I decided to take a quick walk around the resort to locate the rooms where the 2 women and their boyfriends were staying. I was certain their boyfriends would be very interested in knowing what had taken place while they were out deep-sea fishing. Soon I spotted the 2 women I had been searching for emerging from the pool area, each holding a towel. As I followed them, I realized they were returning to their rooms. Sure enough, I watched them enter separate rooms adjacent to one another. That settled one aspect of my plan. If everything timed correctly, and Shannon and Anthony behaved the same way as the previous night, I could completely sabotage the rest of the trip by tomorrow morning. I returned to my room to call the airline and check the earliest available flight for the next morning. The soonest I could get was 10 a.m., which was later than I had hoped, but I booked it anyway. Next, I went back to the front desk to inform them that my wife and I needed to leave the following morning due to a family emergency, and that we would be checking out at 8 a.m. They were understanding and wished me well. I thanked them and headed back to my room. Now I was fully committed to my plan, no matter what. If things didn't go as I had intended, I would still catch the plane in the morning and be home before Shannon. At least I could disrupt her plans before she returned. But if by some miracle everything went according to my plan, she would be stuck here for days, maybe even weeks, before making it home, giving me ample time to truly ruin her. The plan was relatively straightforward. First, I would let Shannon believe she had successfully prohibited substances me, acting like I was falling asleep so she and Anthony could spend the evening together. Second, I would go to the bar, keeping a close eye on them, waiting for the right moment to discreetly add to their drinks what Shannon had tried to use on me. If my timing was precise, they would pass out either just before reaching his room or shortly after entering it. The timing had to be perfect. Third, once they were unconscious in the room, I would move Shannon back to our room, then return to gather up Anthony's belongings, his wallet, cash, passport, credit cards, clothes, and anything else he had brought on the trip. Fourth, I would locate the rooms of the 2 women Anthony had spent time with earlier and discreetly slip the DVR discs under their doors, hoping one of their boyfriends would find and watch the footage. I was certain they wouldn't be happy to see what had been going on while they were away. Since Anthony's room number appeared clearly in the videos, they would know where to find him. Fifth, I would take the same approach with Shannon, taking everything she had brought on the trip, leaving her with just her clothes and purse. I'd leave a small note in her wallet, so she'd know exactly who was responsible. With everything now in place, all that remained was for the players to fulfill their roles. Shannon walked back into the room at 5:30 p.m., appearing more relaxed and radiant than ever before. It hurt to remember how she had ended our marriage and realize that I would never be with this beautiful woman again. Stu, thank you so much for the spa day. It was incredible. I feel like a completely new woman. She truly had a luminous glow. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. When I first mentioned it, you didn't seem very excited, but I'm happy it made you happy. I just wanted to show you how much I love you." I noticed her flinch once more, and her eyes began to well up with tears. "Thank you again. I loved it, and I love you." This time she spoke with much more conviction and emotion. "Anytime, babe. We have a dinner reservation at 7 p.m. How about we take a little time to relax and then get ready for dinner?" She nodded and headed to the bathroom, taking her purse with her. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 bottles of water and handed one to me. "Here, drink this. I'm planning to go dancing tonight, so you should start hydrating now," she said with a wink. All right. Just let me use the bathroom first," I chuckled. Once inside, I followed my usual routine, emptied the bottle and refilled it with water from one of the bottles on the counter. I flushed the toilet to make it seem like I needed to use the bathroom, then returned to the bedroom. I continued sipping my water, and after about 15 minutes, I began acting sleepy. Soon, I was pretending to snore, appearing to be asleep while secretly watching Shannon as she got ready for what she thought would be another evening with Anthony, unaware of what I had planned. She went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I quickly got out of bed and grabbed her phone to check what messages Anthony had been sending her. "Shannon, can't get away this afternoon. Stu bought me a spa package. Can't say no." Anthony, "No problem, babe. Got some other plans for now. Are we still on for tonight?" Shannon, "Oh yeah. I need that connection and everything it promises." Anthony, "Can't wait to be close to you again and share that special moment." My anger wasn't as intense after reading that nonsense because I realized the end was approaching. All I needed to do was follow them to the bar, watch them dance for a few hours, and then spike their drinks. It seemed easy. Well, maybe not entirely. I searched through her purse and discovered the key card to Anthony's room. I pocketed it and returned everything to its original place. Shannon took a little longer to get ready, and then did something completely unexpected. She sat down on the bed beside me and gently touched my cheek. "Baby, after this week I'll be all yours, I promise. I just needed to clear my mind before we start a family. I wish I could have told you and that you'd understand, but I need to do this. The next few days are for me. I wish I could have told you, but I know you'd leave me, and I need you more now than you realize. I love you so much, but I really need to do this." She then leaned over, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "I do love you so much, Stu." At first, I thought she might have noticed I wasn't asleep, but then I realized she was trying to ease her own guilty conscience. However, it was a bit too late for that. She quickly got dressed and left the house. Once the door shut, I was up, dressed, and not far behind her. They had returned to the same bar from the previous night. The place was busier than before, and I even spotted the 2 women and their boyfriends from the beach earlier that day. If my scheme succeeded, they wouldn't be together by morning. I positioned myself at the same location as the night before, settled in comfortably, and began recording the evening's events with my reliable camera. The evening unfolded just as I had anticipated, and soon both of them were seated at a table, engaged in conversation and laughter. It was getting late, and I realized it was almost time to spike their drinks. I swiftly moved toward the bar, ensuring they didn't notice me. Upon reaching the bar, I found an available spot near where the waitresses took orders. I sat down, ordered a beer, and kept a watchful eye on the 2, making sure they hadn't spotted me. As I observed, I noticed their waitress approaching their table to take their drink orders. After jotting down their requests, she immediately returned to the bar to inform the bartender. Fortunately, it was her only order at that moment. I listened carefully to her conversation with the bartender, and as he began preparing their drinks, I signaled the other bartender to place an identical order. The first bartender delivered the drinks on the waitress's tray, but she became distracted while chatting with another waitress. When my drinks arrived, I paid for them and discreetly held one below the bar's edge. I opened a capsule, added the powder to the drink, and stirred it to help it mix in. It frothed slightly but looked fine once blended. I did the same with the second drink and prepared to make the switch. Holding a drink in each hand, I maneuvered past the waitress, positioning my body between her and the bar to facilitate the exchange. I acted quickly, and luckily the bar was busy enough that no one noticed. I passed the waitress and turned to deliver the altered drinks to the happy couple. Then, I swiftly left the bar and returned to my spot outside to continue watching and waiting. The waitress delivered their beverages while I watched, hoping my timing was flawless. It was just after 1 a.m., so if the prohibited substances worked as I anticipated, they would remain out until around 11 a.m. This would fit perfectly into the rest of my plan. All that was left was for them to finish their drinks and return to Anthony's room before they passed out. They continued to sip their drinks, and my anxiety began to grow. What if they didn't finish their beverages? Would they have taken enough of the prohibited substances to achieve the desired effect? Then Anthony leaned over and spoke to Shannon. She smiled, and together they quickly downed the remaining parts of their drinks and left the bar. Thank goodness. I hurried to keep up with them as they seemed eager to get back to the room. As I followed, I noticed Shannon starting to stumble and having trouble walking. Anthony grabbed her arm, placing it behind his neck, and supported her by wrapping his arm around her waist. By the time they reached his room, Anthony was also beginning to stagger a little. My timing in prohibited substances, their drinks, had been perfect, so now all I needed to do was wait for it to take full effect. By the time they reached his doorstep, she could barely stand, and he was stumbling more with each step. He struggled to find his key card, and after several weak attempts, he managed to unlock the door and wobbled into the room. The door shut behind him, so I waited a few minutes before taking the key card I had removed from Shannon's purse to open the door myself. As I stepped into the room, I could hear Anthony inside. "What's wrong with you, babe? You didn't drink that much." His words were slurred, indicating he was soon to lose consciousness. Entering the room, I saw Shannon lying face down on the bed, completely passed out. Anthony was shaking her, trying to wake her up. "Come on, babe, it's time to have a baby." He glanced over and noticed me entering. "Hey, who the hell are you?" he demanded, attempting to stand but nearly falling over. "I'm just her husband, you asshole. Now why don't you behave and pass out so I can get her out of here?" As if on cue, he slowly collapsed to the floor and remained still. As I approached the bed, I began searching for his phone, which was lying on the floor beside him. Picking it up, I couldn't help but check his messages and photos out of curiosity. As I scrolled through hundreds of pictures, most of them harmless, I stumbled upon something significant. There was a folder containing images of various women, some in compromising positions. A few of the photos featured Shannon, as well as several other women who appeared to be familiar, including teachers from Shannon's school and even the wives of some male teachers. It seemed Anthony had been involved with more than just Shannon, and this discovery was about to complicate things. I went through his contact list to see who was saved there, and I decided to share these pictures, excluding those of Shannon, with the contacts in his phone. It took a few minutes to send the images to his contacts, including the husbands of the women involved. Anthony was in for an unpleasant surprise when he returned home. I also sent the pictures of Shannon to her phone and then transferred them to mine for future use. After turning off his phone, I began gathering all of his belongings, clothes, toiletries, and any other items he had brought for the trip, stuffing them into his suitcase. I went through his pockets, taking his cash, wallet, credit cards, and passport. Without his passport, leaving the island would be a difficult challenge for him. After I had finished packing his suitcase, I shifted my focus to Shannon. She was still lying face down on the bed, with one leg hanging off the side. Carefully, I rolled her onto her back, then lifted her into my arms and carried her back to my room. Once there, I placed her on our bed and returned to his room to gather all his belongings. I kept his phone, wallet, and cash because I felt I deserved some compensation. As I went through his room, I made sure he had nothing to take with him. I even took the shoes he was wearing and, on my way back to my room, found the resort's dumpster where I disposed of his suitcase and shoes, covering them with some trash to ensure they wouldn't be found. Back in my room, I began packing my suitcase as well as Shannon's, treating her belongings with the same care as Anthony's. I intended to leave her there with nothing except the clothes on her back, her purse, the tampons she needed, and an empty wallet containing only a note from me. As I was finishing up, I realized it was just after 4 a.m., and I needed to be at the airport by 9 a.m. Since Shannon had stopped drinking around 2 a.m., she would remain unconscious until at least noon. I suspected Anthony would return around 10 a.m., and I would already be gone before either of them woke up. I had just one more thing to do. As I exited the room, I took the 2 DVR discs I had previously created and headed straight to the rooms where the 2 women and their boyfriends were staying. Quietly and swiftly, I slipped a disc under each door before returning to my own room. There, I looked at Shannon peacefully sleeping on the bed, feeling a deep sense of loss and sadness. I had been so eager to start a family with her, but her other plans made it impossible for me to forgive her. I moved around the room to ensure I had packed everything, then grabbed Shannon's suitcase and returned to the same dumpster where I had discarded Anthony's, adding hers as well. Back in the room, I went through Shannon's purse to make sure it was emptied of any money, credit cards, or her passport. I wanted to ensure that her journey back home would be just as difficult as Anthony's. Exhausted, I sat down in one of the 2 chairs in the room and contemplated my next steps once I got home. First, I would empty our bank accounts, pay off our debts, and cancel all our credit cards. Then, I'd pack up all my belongings and move them out of our house. I was certain I would need to find a storage facility, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. Out of our house and out of this failed marriage. Before I realized it, I had fallen asleep, and when I woke up, it was nearly 7 a.m. Pushing myself up from the chair I had been resting in, I walked over to the bed, took one last sorrowful look at Shannon, and carefully lifted her into my arms to carry her out of the room. I went down to the pool area and placed Shannon on one of the lounge chairs. Since I was checking out, I didn't want her there when they came to clean the room and prepare it for the next guests. I returned to the room, grabbed my bags, and took one final thorough look around to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. I still had Anthony's phone, and then an idea struck me. I went back to the pool area and took Shannon's phone. I began sending the pictures and videos to everyone in her contact list, making sure to exclude her younger nieces and nephews. However, I made sure her parents, sisters, and co-workers would see them. At the front desk, I asked for some Scotch tape. I removed the battery from Shannon's phone, placed a small piece of tape over the contacts, and then reinserted the battery to make it look like her phone had simply run out of charge. I also made sure she didn't have her charger, so it would take her some time to get it working again. Shortly after 8 a.m., I heard yelling coming from one of the boyfriends of the women who had been with Anthony. It seemed they had discovered the videos. "You lied to me. You can tell your family the wedding is off, and I never want to see you again." "Find your own way home," one man shouted at his girlfriend. The other man kept a cold, emotionless expression while his girlfriend begged him. "Please don't leave me. I'm sorry. It was a stupid mistake," she cried. "You can go back to him," he responded with a chill in his voice. Soon after, an ambulance pulled up in front of the resort. The manager guided paramedics toward Anthony's room. It seemed something serious had happened. As a small crowd began to gather, I quietly slipped away, hailed a cab, and headed for the airport. When I turned on my phone, I had a voicemail from my brother, Frank. "Stu, what's going on down there? I just got some explicit photos and videos of Shannon. Do you know about this? Call me as soon as you get this." By the time I reached the airport and was waiting for my flight, I called him back. I explained the whole situation, how Shannon had been cheating with Anthony on what was supposed to be our vacation. Frank was shocked, initially thinking it was a joke. I told him to take a closer look at the videos. He apologized and told me to reach out if I needed anything. When I landed, I checked Anthony's phone. There were a dozen voicemails and over 30 texts, many filled with angry threats. It seemed the videos I had sent out hadn't gone over well. After picking up my luggage and car, I started driving home. As I drove, I began to think about my next steps. Divorce was inevitable, but the thought of her walking away with half of everything didn't sit right with me. She cheated, and yet she'd still get half? That just didn't seem fair. As I drove, a new plan started to take shape in my mind, so I began mentally listing what I'd need and how to make it work. She had ruined our marriage, and now I was going to make her life a nightmare. When I got home, I called my brother to ask if he could help me move my things out of the house over the next few days. I wanted everything gone before Shannon returned, so she'd come back to an empty house. Finally, I turned on my phone and found over 20 voicemails and more than a dozen texts. Most of them were from Shannon's sister, asking what was going on and why Shannon wasn't answering her calls. Others came from different members of Shannon's family, asking the same questions. I took a certain amount of satisfaction in the fact that none of the messages were from Shannon herself. It meant she hadn't been able to get her phone working and likely hadn't figured out what had happened yet. I smiled at the thought of her finally fixing her phone, only to see all the texts and voicemails asking about the pictures and videos she had sent. She was in for a rude awakening. The first thing I did was cancel all our credit cards and transfer the money from our joint bank account into my personal one. Then, I began packing up my clothes and other personal items I wanted to keep. Any gifts Shannon had given me over the years went straight into the trash, unless they were valuable, in which case I'd sell them online or take them to a pawn shop. When I got home, I immediately unplugged the house phone, so anyone trying to reach me would have to call my cell. Around 11 p.m., I finally checked my phone and saw several texts and voicemails from Shannon. It looked like she had managed to get her phone working again. The first few texts said things like, "Where are you? Why did you check out and leave me here? Are you okay? I think I've been robbed." Then the tone of her messages changed as she seemed to realize what had happened. I'm sure she received a flood of texts and voicemails about the photos that were sent from her phone to everyone in her contacts. Why? Why did you do this to me? Couldn't we have talked first? I ignored the rest of her messages, knowing it would only make her more upset. The next day was hectic. I had no idea when Shannon might get home, so I had to act fast. First, I went to get boxes to pack up the rest of my things and rented a storage unit big enough to hold it all. Then I went to the bank and made sure there was barely any money left in our joint account. I transferred the rest into my business account, which I planned to close and take the money with me. But there were still a few things I needed to take care of before leaving for good. The house we lived in was a small starter home. We had planned to start with something modest, then upgrade as our family grew. It was just a simple 2-bedroom place with a small bathroom and kitchen. Nothing fancy, but since I run a home improvement business, we had high hopes of transforming it into something special. Now, though, I had other plans for the house, and I was racing around town gathering everything I needed to make Shannon's homecoming unforgettable. With my remodeling experience, I knew a lot about construction and load-bearing walls. Armed with that knowledge, I was ready to do some serious changes to the house. just not in the usual way. Later that morning, my brother Frank came by with his pickup truck. After discussing my situation, we started loading all my stuff into his truck. It took us more than 5 hours and 3 trips to the storage unit, but by the afternoon, I had officially moved out. I didn't tell Frank about my plans for the house or the surprise waiting for Shannon because I knew he'd try to talk me out of it. He did ask what I planned to do next. I just want to leave town and forget this nightmare of a marriage. I don't plan to file for divorce, but I won't be here when she comes back. She can have the house, but that's all she'll get from me. Frank shook his head. That's not going to work. She'll just hire a lawyer and track you down. You should just divorce her and get it over with. Running will only make things worse. Look, I know you're angry and hurt, but don't let your emotions make decisions for you. Get a lawyer and give her half. No, she cheated on me and tried to pass off her lover's baby as mine. She deserves nothing. And that's exactly what she's going to get. I'm not divorcing her. I'm just going to leave her with no money and let everyone see her dirty secrets. Frank knew arguing with me was pointless. I can be stubborn, and once I make up my mind, it's hard to change it. He left, but not before telling me to think things through and not do anything reckless. But I had already thought things through ever since I saw her kiss her lover. Now it was time to set my plan into action. I started working on the house that night and kept at it until the early hours of the morning. I still had no idea when Shannon would return, so I had to work quickly. One thing in my favor was the snow. It seemed like another major storm was rolling in, causing several major airports to shut down. Flights were getting canceled, which would buy me more time to finish my remodeling project. The other advantage of this storm was the additional 8 to 12 inches of snow it would bring. We already had a foot of snow on the ground and rooftops, which would help further my plan. Since I'd been back for only 2 days, I rarely answered my phone, noticing most of the calls were from Shannon. Eventually, I decided to pick up, but only to extract some information from her, nothing more. "Oh, baby, please listen. It was a mistake, just a huge, stupid mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. I'll do anything, just please forgive me." I could hear her crying, but it didn't move me. I wanted nothing more to do with her, but for now I had to play it cool. I gave her a small glimmer of hope, planning to tear it away at the right moment. "Shannon, you hurt me more than anyone ever has. I don't know if I can forgive you or trust you again. I just need to know why. Why would you do this to me? To us? Don't you love me? Wasn't I enough for you?" My voice was calm with just a hint of sadness. What I really wanted was to scream at her, to tell her she was nothing but a cheap girl of easy virtue that I never wanted to see again. But I had to make her believe there was still a chance. "Baby, please let me explain. It meant nothing. He meant nothing. You mean everything to me. You're my life, my reason for living. Please, oh God, please forgive me." She broke down, sobbing. I waited a few minutes before speaking. "Baby, I don't know. I loved you, but you broke my heart. I don't think we can fix this." "No, baby, we can fix it. We'll have an even stronger love, a stronger bond between us if we can just get through this. Please, baby, can you at least wait until I get home so we can talk?" I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I don't know. When will you be back?" "Well, there's a problem. I don't have a passport or a plane ticket. My sister's wiring me some money since all my credit cards were stolen. Oh, that reminds me. Please call the credit card companies and cancel my cards right away." It was unbelievable how she went from begging me to take her back to ordering me to cancel her credit cards. What a piece of work. "Okay, I'll do that right away." "So, you don't know when you'll be home?" "I think in a few days. I've spoken with the U.S. consulate here, and they're getting me a new passport. Well, give me a call when you're about to leave, all right?" "I will. Stu?" "Yes?" "I love you. See you when you get home." I hung up. So, she won't be back for a few more days. Perfect, I thought. It gives me enough time to make sure my home improvements are ready and to start preparing for my new life without her. The following day, Frank called to check on me and invite me over for dinner. I agreed, since it had been over a week since I had a homemade meal. I'd been surviving on pizza and Chinese takeout. After our conversation, I assured him I wasn't going to do anything impulsive. Then, Shannon called. "Hey, babe, I just found out I'll be getting a new passport in a couple of days. All I need now is a plane ticket, and I could be home in a few days. If I can catch an early flight, I might be back by late afternoon. Will you pick me up at the airport? I really want us to talk as soon as possible." "That's not a good idea, Shannon. You should ask your sister to pick you up and bring you home. We can talk once you're here." I was stringing her along. By the time she got to the house, I planned to be at least 100 miles away. "Okay, babe. I love you, and I know if you give me a chance, we can work through this. Right, Stu?" "Yeah, we'll talk, and then we'll see. No promises." I lied, just as she had lied to me. Now, I had a clear idea of when she'd be back, giving me enough time to wrap up a few more things before skipping town. First, I sold my work truck and bought a used one in decent condition, but I registered it under a friend's name. Second, I had to inform the guys working for me that I was shutting down the business due to my upcoming divorce. I apologized for the short notice, but I couldn't leave without explaining what had happened and why. After that, I reached out to an old college friend who now lives in Colorado. When we graduated, he suggested I move out there and start a business with him. He mentioned that with all the winter homes and summer properties, there would be enough work to keep us busy year-round. He was happy to hear from me, though surprised by what had happened between me and Shannon, as he had known her while we were dating and always thought we were perfect together. I asked him if his offer from back in college still stood, or if he could use a skilled handyman. He said his business had grown significantly since the marijuana laws changed, and his workload had tripled over the past year. He welcomed me to come work for him and said he'd be glad to have me. I asked if the work could be off the books, since I wanted to keep Shannon from tracking me down or getting any money from me. Everything was set, and all that was left for me was to leave. Shannon had been calling me several times a day, telling me she loved me and asking for forgiveness. She would also give me daily updates on when she'd be back and promised that I was in for a treat once she returned. It was the day before she was supposed to come home. I had packed up my new truck and cleared the house of all my belongings. Anything left behind was either Shannon's or stuff I didn't care about. I left early in the morning, wanting to slip out of town without anyone noticing. I had told my neighbor across the street to do me a favor and record the moment Shannon got home. I said I'd call him to let him know when to expect her, as I had a surprise waiting for her. He had no idea what was going on or that Shannon and I were having marital issues, but he agreed and said he'd be waiting for my call the next day. Everything was in place as I left town, driving south towards my new life without Shannon. It would take me at least 2 days on the road to reach my friend's house, and by then, Shannon would already be back home. As I drove, the anger that had consumed me over the past week began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of peace. Ever since I had caught Shannon and Anthony together by the pool, it had felt like my life was spiraling out of control, but now I was starting to pull myself out of that pit of despair. Around noon, Shannon called to say she'd be home tomorrow around 4 p.m. She asked again if I could pick her up from the airport, but I told her I had errands to take care of and would get home after her. She could just let herself in when she arrived. After that, I called my neighbor, telling him to have his video camera ready for the surprise I had planned for my wife. By the next day, I was already in Colorado, just an hour away from my friend's place, when Shannon called me. The house, it just collapsed in on itself. It must have been all the snow. I had just put my key in the door, turned it, and then I heard a huge crack. The roof fell in. "Oh my God, our house is gone," she sobbed. Now, Shannon, don't worry. I'm sure your parents still have your room ready for you. As for me, I've made other plans," I replied cheerfully. "What are you talking about? Our house is gone. How can you be so happy about this?" She was starting to get angry. Good. Everything had gone according to my plan. I had set the house to collapse the moment she unlocked the door. I installed temporary braces in the basement and cut all the floor joists with a chainsaw. The front door's lock was wired to a switch, which activated a winch I bought for cheap at a pawn shop, using pulleys and ropes attached to the temporary supports. When she turned the key, the winch engaged, and down came the house. Well, my dear, the house didn't just collapse because of the snow. I had a hand in making that happen. You see, I did to the house what you did to our marriage. Good luck finding a new place to live. As for me, I'm almost at my new home. I hung up on her and called my neighbor. "Stu, you won't believe what just happened. Your house collapsed. I guess it couldn't handle all that snow, but honestly, it didn't seem like there was that much. At least not enough to cause this. I got the whole thing on video, and luckily your wife is fine. She was trying to open the door when it happened." It was like bam, and the whole place just caved in, he said, clearly excited. I told him to send me the video when he could. I wanted a copy. After that, I turned off my phone and continued driving toward my new life. It's been nearly 3 years now, and I've built a comfortable life for myself here in Colorado. I still stay in touch with a few friends back in Minnesota and keep up with what's going on there. I didn't want to reach out to any family members directly, as I knew they would inform Shannon of my whereabouts. It seems Shannon got what she wanted and became pregnant with Anthony's child. For a while, she told everyone the baby was mine, claiming I ran off like a coward because I couldn't handle becoming a father. Even my mother believed her, as she was desperate for a grandchild. I reached out to a friend, who then contacted my brother, asking him to insist that Shannon get a DNA test done comparing the baby's DNA with his. If I were the father, there would be a close match with my brother. If not, there'd be no match. Foolishly, she agreed. When the results came back, my mother threw her out of the house, screaming at her to never come back with that child. As for Anthony, it seems he was badly hurt by those 2 men at the resort and spent more than a week in the hospital before he was able to return home. When he finally returned, several other men, let's call them ex-husbands, were waiting for him to compound his injuries. He has since left the city. The destination is unknown. I think his days as a ladies' man are numbered,